Hi, and welcome to Digital Learning Resources Zoomed In. This is our second of the podcasts, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about gaming and how it affects education and culture and questions like that. And to help us answer those questions, we have with us the one and only Rachel Halbert right here. She is the executive producer, director of...
Producer, creator, director.
She does everything with a TV show called Glitched, and that is available on App TV. She's a student here at App State and does that, and also it's available on YouTube. So pretty cool stuff going on there. But she does that, and what is the show Glitched about?
Glitched is a gaming and tech news show. We have 3 episodes a week covering, having constant coverage of what's the latest coming out in that news.
And my question to Rachel was, what does glitched mean? and what's a glitch? What do you mean? And how does that change or inform the community that surrounds gaming and technology and digital stuff for the young folks in the world? So what does glitched mean to you?
So when something is glitched, it is something happening in terms of a game. It's something that's happening within a game that was not intended by its creators. Whether that be an exploit that if you hit this button this many times, you're going to have 1,000 gold or something like that in the game. Or if I go into this area, no one can hit me or what have you. It's something that wasn't intended, but can be found or exploited within a program or game.
So how do you think that relates to education and educating folks that are used to a glitched environment where they're building community and solving problems together? Does that help or does that hurt? I
think it can have separate effects on both sides. You do have things that do build a community. You have forums that are like, hey, if you do this, you can get this. I think more often it's more of a supportive atmosphere when you're thinking of single player games where it's like, oh, hey, if you do this, you can get your character to do this, or you can you can get this on your farm. I'm thinking of Stardew Valley. You can get this on your farm if you do this at this time or what have you. Whereas in competitive games where you have rankings and multiplayer and online and stuff like that, I think you see it more as more combative, because if you find an exploit, if you find a glitch that you can use to your advantage, people don't want to share that if possible. And also people it's not something where it's like, oh, that's cool that you did that. It's like, oh, you're cheating. So it can be seen in very different lights depending on the situation. I feel like those are 2 ways you often see it.
I think about failing forward and just learning from your mistakes and all of those things that how does that feel for somebody who's a digital native that's getting into an environment that is challenged solving problems? I mean, where are we going with that? With the game playing mentalities, and how is that going to affect the education of your kids going forward? Is that going to influence things in general, do you think? That whole notion of a glitched environment by nature?
I think it does have a benefit of helping people think outside the box, whether that's for good or evil. It does make you if I do it this way, I've played games where one I've played recently is Destiny. I know that if I get in the certain spot while I'm on a three-man team and my other players are down, I can snipe from up here without the enemies noticing me. So that's something that it's not exactly what probably was intended for that level that we're playing on, but it's something that I figured out as oh, this is something that's helpful to me. So I think it's thinking outside of the box. You can gain thinking outside the box in a way that can benefit you. Mm-hmm. But I also think sometimes it can be used as a crutch, where it's oh, since I can snipe all these people, I don't have to worry about being good at aiming from medium range or what have you. But obviously that can also translate into real life, where it's say I'm doing a project and I'm oh, but if I do it this way, I'm gonna pass, it's not gonna matter. Whereas if I try to
cutting corners,
it's cutting corners. I'm not gonna lie, we've all done it, but I don't think that's the best thing for going forward, because sooner or later it's going to catch up with you and it's going to cause more issues rather than help you in the end.
Well, are there any practical things that you've learned from video games, like terms? Because I know that's a big deal, having instructed a lot of different people from different walks of life in using technology. One of the biggest or the hardest gaps to overcome is understanding the terms, because there's just so many. So are there any particular terms that you use all the time in gaming that have really helped you with other aspects of learning digital?
I don't know in particular if there's any terms that translate to something other than gaming. I do think you definitely improve communication, like finding little ways to understand things, whether it be if you actually get to talk to someone, or if people you like shorthand. If you're playing like a lot of computer games, you can like have the chat typing while you're actually playing too. But also like subtle things like how I'm moving my character means this kind of thing, like subtle things that you pick up that like no one's ever been like, hey, this is what you do. Yeah. It's something like you pick up. So I think you do, in communication, you learn how to pick up on those little things. And I think you do benefit from, I mean, even like physical things like hand-eye coordination and having greater reaction time and being able to interact with certain things. Like I know, oh, this is how a menu normally works. Like as simple as that. And whereas like, oh, like where would I go for this? Like I know this is generally where these types of things would be. And I think that does translate over to other digital like programs and equipment. I know, oh, this is generally how things in technology and like menu grouping is grouped, I guess.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm thinking of my own using technology and stuff. And yeah, there's certain times in using a game where you know that this button means back and this button means this, and sometimes it's not always a button, but it's an icon, and you kind of like learn the icons and stuff. So I could see a few instances. I don't know, that was just a side question, because I was thinking, you know what would be great if we could get people excited about learning some of the more boring programs that they don't always want to, by just giving them a game, which will help them learn some of the basic fundamental, this is a menu, you know, the 3 dots, a lot of the things that we talk about, like 3 dots and the hamburger icon and all these different icons, 9 square, like understanding simply that takes you to more information it's a step that you don't have to teach if they already know it.
I guess it gets to kind of a community lexicon for those sorts of things. You develop your own terms for explaining things. I just like the idea that there are communities being built around gaming, and it's just, I think it offers a lot to educators, just because of its community building capacity and its problem solving capacity. To just teach those skills, because kids are very skilled problem solvers these days. They're just not solving the problems that a lot of adults would like them to solve. So how do you cross it over? That's really what I would really want to hear a good answer to that.
I think while there are like the majority of video games that you hear about and see are definitely focused more on entertainment value than anything else, I do think there are still games, and I still think there are potential for games that delve into more serious topics or more learning focused things. I know I went to NAB this past spring, and the topic for their main I can't think of the word, but main lecture series that was going on was gaming in society. And I attended that, and I actually heard a lot of things I didn't know about games that are being made to educate and how they have worked in different areas. There was a game in, I think it was Western Africa, that this company, they made a truck that had systems in it and had this game like programmed onto these computers, and they went around to different communities, and the game was teaching about it was teaching about AIDS and different like things, trying to teach like, oh, this is why these things happen, these are what you can do to prevent, that kind of thing. And it made it in a gamified way that helped a lot of people understand and showed them in a different way that they weren't really being taught. And from what I was presented with at that conference, it actually did help in those communities that it was in. So I found that really interesting. And I do think that more and more games can be made in this like gamified way to make learning fun. I know even a AAA game, which I've not heard of this happening before, AAA game, Assassin's Creed. The newest one that's coming out later this month is called Assassin's Creed Origins. And early next year, they are adding a section in the game. The game is set in ancient Egypt, and they are adding a completely gameplay-free version that's just allows you to explore and learn about ancient Egypt and different areas within it and different things going on with it, just by being able to walk around and actually like see these things created in this game world.
Well, that's cool.
So
that's a game made for gaming, but they're just they're stripping the
they're
gameplay,
adapting it, yeah.
And so that it's just, you know, we're creating all this virtual reality that's beautiful and probably historically accurate in certain areas, and just like, we've already got this, why don't we just that's a brilliant idea. I like that.
And it's something the series has been known for, like keeping accuracy when it comes to the setting of where things are. Obviously some things are mixed around because Assassins and Templars probably aren't around. Not going to say they're not, but they're probably not hanging around going at each other. But it is something that it's like you've always seen, like, oh, this is beautiful, and people go and they're like, hey, this is where this thing is, and it's showing how like hard these developers work to make this as accurate as possible.
That's cool.
And so to see that and see it taken to Egypt, where like not much is taught or known about like the area in general, to see what's going to happen with that, I think is really exciting.
And there's one thing that a game has led to of real positive benefit for my kids. They can type. I can't type nearly as well. And I can remember getting a game, Meteor something, they had to type with speed to avoid getting destroyed. And all three of my kids, this is 12, 13, however many years later, are very skilled typists.
Yep. That's what I did growing up, was Mario teaches typing, and it was exactly that. It was like, we're playing Mario Brothers, but we're typing to do it. It's like,
so my question,
it tricks you.
What's next? What's next? The kids now that are doing these games, 10, 15 years from now, we could sit around and say, oh, that was really of benefit because they developed a skill that's valuable by playing those games.
Programming. There's more and more games being made to teach kids programming, which I personally am not looked at any myself, so I couldn't comment on their fun value, but I do know that it's something that is becoming more prevalent. And it's very interesting because it's something I would have never thought about being taught as a kid, how to program something. So,
and that would make a good podcast.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, and I know a little bit about Apple has their Swift Playground, and that's just an app specifically geared towards children learning and having fun, developing and learning how to develop with their Swift programming, and that's a really cool thing. It's totally meant for that.
Well, let me take you back to 1979 when I got my first Apple IIe computer. There was a program called Logo that it was Papert out of MIT, out of the Media Lab, and it was a simple way for kids to program a little turtle, and it was turtle graphics, and it was a very simple, brilliant interface that taught algorithmic thinking and spatial problem solving to little itty bitty kids. This is 1980, right, in the early 80s.
Right.
And I'm sure if you were to interview some of the kids that were exposed to that, they may be some of the most, brilliant algorithmic programmers now for Facebook or whoever's using that skill set. So that's my challenge thinking going forward. Is like, how can we think that far forward now with what we're introducing to kids in our education.
I know growing up, I was homeschooled, and so most of my curriculum was actually games. Well, I don't know about most, but pretty much every part of my curriculum, I at least had one game that I helped learn at. So I had a game that was like, it was like a typical game. You're running through and there's a storyline and you're trying to get to the end of the story and make this thing happen. But along that way, the task that you're presented with, instead of you have to swipe left and swipe right like on a lot of iPad games or hit X and triangle, instead the objective was to solve a math problem or complete a sentence where you're having to add punctuation and stuff like that. Just very simple, homework tasks that you're used to doing as a kid. And that helps you get along the process. And so you want to do more of those and more of that homework because it helps you finish this storyline. And it was really great. And I remember it was like late 90s, early 2000s that I was playing these games. And I still think the world of them. I mean, I can't.
How about Oregon Trail?
Oregon Trail.
Oregon Trail, problem solving.
Yeah.
Like you're like, okay, I died for these reasons. This is what I need to try to adapt. Like you learn that like, okay, so I adapted this, and you learn from your mistakes basically and learn how to adjust things.
That would be good. Oregon Trail 2.
Oregon Trail and what was the other
Make
one?
it
Like City Builder or something like that, where you have to build like a hotel.
I had one with like it was a sphere and you had to get it to a certain area and you had to control it with the keyboard. It was very much like problem solving, figuring out how to like get over these obstacles kind of thing.
Right. So that's the challenge. What's next?
Yeah.
An Oregon Trail 2 that's historically accurate, that teaches people about historical events with accuracy and clarity.
And I think the main thing, and this is something I heard recently on a podcast, which was, the dark side of games is when people think of it as a way to just escape reality, and they basically think of gaming as one world, and then their real life as another world, and apparently that's the bad thing. You don't want to think about it that way. You just want to think about it as more of just an extension of what you do in the real world. It's not anything different. That's okay, but when you think about it as different, it's the problem. And I think fundamentally that's one of the issues with the public school system, is that public schoolers, they want to go to, or they don't really want to go to school because they see school as this one thing, and they go there and they do their learning, and then they come home and their education switch like turns off. It's like they only have to learn when they're at school, but when they're at home, they can turn it off, they can shut down, and that's not conducive to actually learning stuff. You have to be a lifelong learner and constantly learning. And I think one of the biggest things I learned from doing education in video games and other types of games, board games, is that you can learn in any situation. That learning can be fun. That learning doesn't have to be go to a location and have learning taught at you, and then you're trying to download it. It could be wherever you are. That could be a moment to learn, and that for me was a huge thing. And so that's what I see as being the biggest impact with gaming and education. I
just told Chelsea, I was sitting in there, and one of the folks in the lab was asking me what I taught. And I said, I don't teach anything. Most of the people I've known in life are ready to learn, but seldom ready to be taught. I just try to help people learn. And Chelsea started giggling, but I think there's some truth to that. It's like kids, are ready to learn in school, out of school, but they go to school to be taught. And I think that's where, games help kids learn if we let them, right? So where do they fit into what's going forward now? That's, I'm really interested in how we can work with educators as gamers to bring them together in a way that's really meaningful, and adults, professional development.
I think something very important about games is that whenever you're playing a game, to continue to want to play a game, any game that's good, that's going to keep you around for any reason whatsoever, is it gives you a self-motivating factor, something that's motivating you to continue on. It's like if I'm playing a game and I'm going on and on and on, and I don't feel like if I don't feel like I'm being rewarded in some way, or that like I'm accomplishing something, I feel like lots of times there's no reason for me to continue playing it. And that's not to say that, oh, if this game is super hard or if this, like, learning this thing is super hard, that I'm going to quit. But I think it's, like, giving that factor, like, oh, okay, like, I'm learning what I'm doing wrong or what I'm doing this. And, like, having that that push to make you want to continue on and continue to, like, oh, no, now I'm going to beat this or now I'm going to do this. And bringing that into education in a way I don't think a lot of people, kids, like children and kids included, don't have that motivating factor where they're like, oh, like, I'm just going to school and I'm being told this and I'm going to be told this and that's exactly what's going to be on test and I'm going to write it down and that's it. Like, I feel like that was a thing for me, like, growing up. It's like, okay, they told me this, I know exactly what I need to do. I'm going to get an A, and then that's what I'm supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
And
do as little work as possible to reach the goal.
Yeah.
Because the goal, I think, is...
There's no challenge there.
There's no challenge, and I think the goal ends up being the grade or the score rather than learning. Mm-hmm. The goal isn't about making sure you've learned something and that you're actually being able to use this and apply it in your real life. It's more about, I have to get an A. That gets me to the next goal, so I get an A in this class. So that's what the goals become. So we've created this poorly designed game out of education, I think. So maybe gaming and education already exists. It's just done poorly. So.
Well, to quote Alfie Kahn, he wrote a book called Punished by Reward, which is just that idea that parents and educators punish kids really by rewarding them, and that's one big warning I think that educators need to hear. The other is, the addiction of games. How do you get addicted? Not to really solving something, but just because it feels constantly good. It's like a Facebook addiction. Every time you get a like or something, you get this little dopamine rush and feel good, and you stay stuck to it, but you're not doing anything beneficial.
I mean, I think that partially plays into what Lucas was talking about with, like, having it as an escape. Because I have talked to a lot of people, and I've worked on a couple of audio and video documentaries at this point where I've spoke with people about how they view games and how they use them and, like, themselves. And a lot of people it is an escape. They're like, I don't like what I'm doing in my regular life, or, like, I find this boring, and here's this beautiful fantasy world where I can be whatever I want to be. And I think that is very enticing to a lot of people. And I don't think it's exactly a bad thing to find escape in that. I don't know if I agree with the point that, like, using it as an escape is a bad thing. But I do think it is important to know and understand that, because you do have to know where the lines are.
Yeah, you have to know how to regulate that for sure. Well, let's not take too much time, but I think we had some really good questions, and I think maybe we'll just give that to you. If you're watching, you can just ask this or answer these questions down in the comments below. What is the next steps for gaming and education, and what is the next way that we can educate through gaming? And what do you think some of the downsides are to current, gaming and education, or some of the benefits of it? So just leave a comment down below of what you think. I think that's all we have for this conversation. Unless you have anything else.
Just remember the analog games like chess and even checkers are still games.
Those are still games.
Are still games.
And that's an important thing too. Just I'll put that. We used to play Monopoly as, like, a math. My mom was totally okay with it. She's like, yeah, just do that for your math and, like,
add it up.
Yeah, just adding and
those board games.
Yeah.
Now are pretty boring.
Yeah. Well, if you like this video, be sure to click the like button, hit subscribe. That'll be somewhere down here. Check out one of our other videos. Go check out Rachel's channel over at Glitch. We'll put that somewhere here as well. We can put a little link. And we'll see you next time.